I don't know.
You got to speak up a little bit. That's only for the live.
Oh, okay, great. Can everyone hear me all right? So I'm Scott Edward Walker. It's great to be here. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm the only guy in green. Oh, wait, there's a guy over here. We're supposed to have green beer and pizza, and I messed up. I was supposed to get it, as it turns out. So I apologize. We're working on it. So anyway, I thought I'd very quickly give you some background. I'm a corporate lawyer. I've worked for about 17 years doing this stuff. I started in New York for about, everyone hear my accent? All right. Anybody else from New York? All right. Excellent. So you get the free pizza and beer. Any lawyers here, by the way? Any other lawyers? All right, you have to leave. I'm sorry. No, it's all right. Lawyers, you're right. So I was in New York for about 8 years, and I kind of saw this big. I worked at two very large law firms doing huge deals, and from time to time, entrepreneurs would come in as clients, and we'd also be handling smaller deals for large companies. And I really identified just a big problem. The problem was that the entrepreneurs were getting kind of screwed. You know, they were getting pushed down. All their work was getting pushed down to first and second year associates at rates of like $350 an hour. And these guys were like fresh out of law school, and I don't know what they're doing. And I got so much pressure to bill. I'm like, what is going on? So I kind of identified, maybe like some of you entrepreneurs, a problem. And I moved out here about 5 years ago to California to start sort of a different type of law firm, to create a new business model where I can get lawyers with 10 plus years experience sort of rolling up the sleeves, doing your work for rates similar to like a first and a second year associate. So it's worked out really well. We have kind of what we call virtual office in San Francisco, New York, D.C. We've been very busy because of the recession and people kind of like worrying about their legal fees and the costs. So anyway, that's kind of my background. What I want to do tonight, and Efren's been kind of pulling this whole thing together, and I thank him and Koloff. These guys are amazing. We wanted to talk about sort of the most significant legal mistakes that startups make. And I've done this presentation before. It can kind of be, we originally did like sort of the 10 top legal mistakes, sort of like David Letterman style, but I think it's just overwhelming. So we split it up. We're going to do a part 2 next month, and I'll make sure I get the pizza and beer and take care of that. So so tonight we'll just go through 5, and I think what I would say the takeaway here is, many of you, are you all sort of entrepreneurs working on startups? Is that is that the case? Okay. So, you just want to kind of listen and maybe walk out here and just be familiar with the issues, right? Because there's a bunch of things that you kind of mess up. I have a different perspective. Practicing law for 17 years, I get all these phone calls and I'm meeting with clients, and many times it's just things have kind of gone sour. And, that's when I'm trying to identify these mistakes so you don't make them. Because often what happens, and, having done this for a while, obviously money's tight. Many of you say, who the fuck needs a lawyer? Are you allowed to curse here, by the way? Or okay, believe that. You're just going to kind of scramble. And so I think, what ends up happening, unfortunately, is you do it on your own, and you go on LegalZoom, whatever, DocStock, and you kind of figure it out. You're all smart over the weekend, and 6 months later, you try to get financing, and everything's screwed up, right? And that's when I get the call many times. And instead of spending, a few grand, which could have been, now it's 10 grand. And so hopefully that's what I think, the best kind of lesson walking away from here, a takeaway would be, look, there's just a few issues, not rocket science. Let me just try to nail those so I don't have to, worry about this down the road. So I'm going to do it sort of in chronological order. I think that's often beneficial. So what I mean by that is you're an entrepreneur. You've come up with an idea, maybe you and your friend or a cousin or whatever. And now the question is, and here's the first mistake, you may be employed somewhere, you may be an employee, right? And so you have this project, you've identified this great idea, but the mistake is that it turns out your employer actually has the ownership to the IP or to the idea. Why? Because you've signed some kind of confidential information invention assignment agreement, or it's in your employer's space, and you've been, you're working for somebody else, and you're kind of designing something in their space, right? Or, you've been using their facilities, even if it's not in their space. If you're using their facility, what I mean by their computer, their whatever, their phone even. So there's all kinds of case law out there in California. So that's kind of the first, when I get the phone call, hey, we want to start a venture, first question I say, are you currently employed? If you are, send me over all your documentation. If you've signed any employment agreement, confidential information, invention assignment agreement, send me over the employment policy book, and let's make sure that there are no issues that may inhibit, your venture. In California, it's very, very pro-employee. And so as long as you're not designing something in your employer's space and you're not using their facility, you're okay. So that's great. And California also has non-competes are unenforceable in California other than the context of the sale of the business. So that's also great, because in some other states, you have to worry about that as well, actually competing with your employer. So that, and the other IP sort of related issue that you all should be aware of is often, and here's the mistake that's made, you start your venture and then you get some third party to do the developing, right? Maybe it's someone in Ukraine, China, whatever, okay? And there's always issues associated with that in terms of IP ownership. And sometimes there's no documentation. Sometimes there's some kind of crazy Ukrainian or Russian documentation. I mean, and these issues come up again, 6 months, a year down the road. Here come the investors, and what's the first thing they say? It's a web company. Show me you own the IP. It's like, what? What are you talking about? Of course they own the IP. It's my company. Well, show me you own the IP. Did you code up the site? No, we used a third party about a year ago from China. It's like, well, okay, where's the assignment agreement? How do you own the IP? So that's kind of mistake number one, IP ownership. Mistake number two, so now let's say we've gotten past that. I've gone through your documentation. Everything looks good. You now have a co-founder. We're going to put that issue aside for now. Choosing your this is not a legal issue, but here's a freebie. Choosing your co-founder is the most important business issue you face. Coming straight from Paul Graham, the guru from Y Combinator, the guys at Venture Hacks, my friends Nivi and Naval, they all say the same thing. Choosing a co-founder is the most important business decision you can make. You know, this is not rocket science. Obviously, you're trying to put together a strong team. Assuming you have a strong co-founder, now what do we do? Well, now you have to form an entity, right? Choosing the wrong entity is mistake number two. So what do I mean by that? Here's the phone call. Hey, yeah, I have an LLC in Wyoming. I have an LLC in Nevada, okay? If you're you're looking to get venture funding, if you're looking to reach out to outside investors to get angel and eventually VC funding, you have to be a corporation, okay? So that's the mistake, and you want to be in Delaware. You want to be a Delaware corporation. This is not rocket science. I don't care what anyone tells you, that's where you want to be, believe me. So your accountant's going to say, be an LLC. Why do the accountants say be an LLC? Because an LLC is so complicated from a tax partnership perspective. So 9 times out of 10, here's a phone call. What are you talking about, Scott? My accountant said be an LLC. The accountant's fucking wrong, okay? He's wrong. Now, I'm not just saying this. All the guys, the big Hollywood, superstar lawyers in Silicon Valley, they all say the same thing. It's not rocket science. You want to be a corporation in Delaware. The only tricky issue is whether you should start as an S corporation or a C corporation, okay? And I don't know if anybody understands the distinction. It's just really a tax issue. An S corporation is a pass-through entity, so the taxes would pass through to the owners, the shareholders. C corporations today, and we get calls all the time from sophisticated entrepreneurs who understand this. There's a new law on the book. It actually was enacted back in October, and it's very, very pro-entrepreneur, pro-angel investing. It relates to what's called, technical name, qualified small business stock. If you start as a C corporation and you actually issue this qualified small business stock, it's not a lot of hurdles to jump over. They give you, it's an unbelievable tax break on capital gains. If you hold the stock for 5 years, you pay 0 capital gains, up to $10 million. So this is a big, big tax break. A lot of people aren't aware of that. Even the accountants I talk to, most of them aren't aware of it. You only can take advantage of this tax benefit if you form a C corporation. You can't be an S corp and convert. You can't be an LLC and convert. LLCs, to get to LLCs, who's formed an LLC here? Be honest. Okay, great. So here's the problem with LLC. I'm not trying to rain anyone's parade. It's just, first of all, incredible tax partnership rules. There are people who spend their entire career just on tax partnership rules, particularly when you add debt to the LLC. So what happens is VCs can't invest in pass-through entities like S-corps or LLCs. They can't because they have investors. They don't want pass-through treatment. So you have to be a C corp to get any type of venture capital corporation, any type of venture capital investment. With an S corp, it just happens automatically. It's easy. It's just nothing.
Does that include angels?
Angels, very few angels will invest in an LLC, but if they're individuals as opposed to being a fund. Some of the super angels have the little funds. Then you're okay generally. An S corp, yeah, it gets a little tricky if you do a convertible note. There's some people out there think that might be sort of a second. So S corps, you have to have. There's certain limitations with S corporations. Many of you may know. You only could have one class of stock. You can have up to 100. It's sort of arbitrary rules. I don't even understand it. Up to 100 invested. So if you have a second class of stock, that's what I say. You issue preferred stock to the VCs. You automatically convert to a C corp. So it's just done. So in answer to your question, some sophisticated tax guys or others take the position that this convertible note may be a sort of a second class. I'm not sure. But S corps, I think, really work out well for sort of an entrepreneur who sold a company already, has a big pile of cash, knows he's pumping in a bunch of cash to the new entity, and really is going to take advantage of the losses going forward. It's kind of an unusual situation. Because if you know you're going to probably have losses, so you can take advantage of it. But very often, you're not going to be putting a lot of money in. You only can take losses up to the amount you contribute. Okay? So I don't want to get too technical here. I'm not a tax lawyer. We always tell our clients to get an accountant involved early on. We're not tax lawyers. I don't pretend to be a tax lawyer, but I'm very familiar with these issues. So when you first start, I get calls all the time from, hey, we're going to start a company. Can you help us? I mean, one of the things we do, and this is not a promo for me, but we put together like a startup package. So we have all the documentation that you need. Delaware Corporation will qualify you in California if that's where you're located and all the other stuff. But we always recommend you get an accountant involved. Once you form a separate entity, that entity has to file separate tax returns, both at the federal and the state level. So you need an accountant anyway. So I always encourage my clients, sit down with the accountant and discuss the S corp versus C corp issue. There are also often what's called an A3B election. You have to do filings relating to vesting, which we'll get to. So it's good to have an accountant. That's sort of the team. You want a good lawyer, good accountant. Same thing in New York. I'm doing these big acquisitions, billion-dollar deals. We always have a really strong, often 2 or 3 tax lawyers, and then a bunch of corporate guys. You have to work together. Any questions, by the way? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain what you mean by qualify you in California?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, and so wherever you're doing business, so you can incorporate in Delaware, no matter where you're located, but wherever you're technically doing business is sort of a legal term, you have to qualify in that particular state. And so since, most of you, I think, here are located in California, you have to take the position, even though if you're a web company or otherwise, that you have a principal office. Normally, the principal office would be the home or, a place like this. And so then you would qualify to do, it's like a mini incorporation, just a couple of forms you file. You have to pay California a franchise tax. So that's the downside, and often you hear, I hear this all the time. Why do I want to be in Delaware? I got to pay them a franchise, a few $100 a year. I got to pay California $800 a year, and this is adding up. And the answer is, you know what? You got to pay to play. I mean, that's the bottom line. I wish it were differently, but the way I look at it, the cost of entry is so low today. You think about guys, in the past, or people starting a restaurant. I mean, can you imagine? I'm sure most of you are tech-oriented. Think about how much it would cost to start a restaurant, I mean, you got to find the space, you got to lease it, you got to get a lawyer to do a lease, you got the first month, you got the last month, you got the security deposit, you got to buy all the inventory, 20, 30, 50, 100 grand. You can start a company today with just a few grand, So that's why I say when I hear this, oh, I don't want to be in Delaware, I don't want to qualify. I mean, forget it. You got to have at least, be smart. Budget a little money aside. You got to have a little $5 grand. Take care of the lawyer, the accountant. Get all this stuff buttoned down so it doesn't come back to haunt you. And all the guys have been successful entrepreneurs. They all say the same thing. They've made the mistake. Once you make these mistakes, then the next time presumably you won't make it. I've seen all the mistakes. That's why I'm trying to share them with you. So was there another question over here? Yeah.
So why Delaware versus California?
Yeah, Delaware is 90% of the corporations in this country are located in Delaware. And the reason, it's just an historical fact. All the public companies, 90% of them are in Delaware as well. Delaware just went out maybe about 100 years ago and decided, a way to raise money is for us to become the place to incorporate. And so they have a special court system. They have extremely efficient sort of administrative body where you can file the documents. I mean, in California, it could often take 30 days to get things turned around. Delaware, it's just a day or two. And most importantly, they have protections VCs will be sitting on your board, and they have the strongest protections for management. So that's really the key. I mean, the VC will not sit on your board generally if you're not in Delaware, because they're always worried about getting sued. And so Delaware has the strongest management protection. But that's a good question.